Hello and welcome to Painted for Combat, where today we have a very exciting update for Resin2FDM. Resin2FDM is an add-on for Blender that allows us to take 3D printable miniatures with resin-style pre-supports and make those supports more compatible with FDM printers by bulking them up to work with a 0.2mm nozzle and splitting them from the model so that we can print the supports faster and less detailed than the Mini itself. Now, today's video is not going to be a complete walkthrough of Resin2FDM, so if you're unfamiliar with the tool, I'll leave links down below to the version 1.4 complete guide that came out with the previous version of the tool. That video will take you through everything from installing the plugin, processing your minis, and how to slice them for the best results. So go check out that video first, familiarize yourself with the Resin2FDM process, then jump back here to check out the updates. Today we launch Resin2FDM version 1.5, with the addition of some very highly requested features and some amazing improvements to the overall workflow. This update has a little bit of something for everyone, whether you're using the Lite or advanced versions of the tool. So let's go ahead, jump into Blender and take a look at this update in action, starting with the additions to the free version of the tool, Resin2FDM Lite. With Blender open, we can see that I have Resin2FDM Lite version 1.5 installed. And it is worth noting that as of this update and moving forward, Resin2FDM will only be available for Blender versions 4.2 and above. But before we do look at the tool, it is worth noting that some of the new features do require an additional plugin to be installed. As we can see up here, I have an additional plugin called 3MF Import Export. And this is another incredible tool developed by ClonePhase, who is the current developer of Resin2FDM. This is its own plugin that adds a ton of functionality for importing and exporting 3D printable files. But what does this mean for Resin2FDM? It means that we will no longer have to manually change all of our support settings in Orca Slicer for every print we prepare, which is such an awesome workflow improvement. By going up to Edit, Preferences, and finding Resin2FDM Lite, we can come up to this dropdown and click View Details to change a few of the default settings for some of the new features. And as we can immediately see here, the mesh repair feature, which was previously only available in Resin2FDM Advanced, has become a core part of the tool, so we've gone ahead and moved that into the Lite version as well. And in the optional features, we can now enable the 3MF export by default. Moving over to the Build Plate tab, this was introduced in the previous version of the tool, but has gone through a couple of bug fixes in this version. So anyone that was reporting issues using the Build Plate feature in Blender versions 5.0 and above, those issues should all now be resolved. Moving over to the Advanced tab in this menu, we can see some of the incredible new features introduced in this update. Dropping down the Orca Slicer Support Settings tab, we can immediately see some very familiar numbers that we would be used to seeing inside of Orca Slicer, meaning that from this menu we can change what those settings are going to be in our exported file when we open it in Orca Slicer. For me specifically, I generally tend to use my 0.08mm profile, so we'll go ahead and dial these settings in for that. Starting at layer height, this will want to be double whatever your printing profile is. So for me, I'll go ahead and set this to 0.16, and everything else we can leave pretty much as it is, because this is what I use for all of my Resin2FDM prints. But to make sure that any changes I have made to these settings are saved, we can open up the Presets tab and create a preset for these settings. And I'll just call this something along the lines of 0.08mm printing. And now this preset has been created, and we'll be able to see that later once we have the tool open. But it's not just the support settings that we're exporting by default. If we go ahead and open up the Slicer Profiles tab, we can see that there is now an option to import a 3MF file. So to create a slicer profile here in Blender, we need to open up Orca Slicer and export a project with the settings we want to use for our miniatures. So with Orca Slicer open, you'll want to make sure that you have the correct printer selected, and then choose whichever printing profile you use for your miniatures. Whether this is one of mine from the Patreon, like my 0.08mm profile that I'll be using here, or another one such as a Fat Dragon Games profile, which I know is very popular among Resin2FDM users. With your profile selected, make any changes you need to make. For example, supports are enabled in this profile here, so I'll disable those since we don't need them for Resin2FDM. Then I'll simply come up to File, Save Project As, and export this as a 3MF file somewhere that we can easily find it in Blender. Back in Blender, we can go ahead and click the Import button, and then track down wherever you exported your 3MF file to. And then simply click Load. And here we can see that it will create a new slicer profile using whatever your 3MF file was called. And if you need to, you can rename that here. And with these settings dialed in, we can go ahead and close out of the add-ons page. Today I'll be processing and printing this Furbolg Ranger from one of my absolute favorite sculptors at the moment, Twin Goddess Miniatures. So we'll go ahead and import that model as usual. Under the feature toggles, we can see that we can now enable or disable both the 3MF export and mesh repair options. So if you're not seeing those pop up as we move through the tool, just double check that they're actually enabled. And then as usual, we can split by loose parts. and then we can simply select our miniature as usual and click Assign. For this model, I'll go with a support thickness of 0.2, which I'll apply. And then this is the mesh repair feature, which has been brought over from the advanced version of the tool. What this will do is quickly run through a series of mesh repair features to make sure that there aren't any holes in our mesh or supports before heading into Orca Slicer. And now this is where our new features come into play. In the 3MF export box at the bottom of the tool, we can now see that we have drop-downs for both our support and slicer settings. And dropping these down, we should see those presets we created earlier. Both the printer profile that we exported from Orca and the support profile that we dialed in to work with it. So we'll go ahead and select each of these, then make sure that we have the correct output folder and file name, then simply hit Export 3MF. Opening up that export location, we can see that we have a 3MF file waiting to be opened. Opening up this file, we can immediately see that it has changed the printing profile to the one that we asked it to, and has maintained all of those changes we made, such as disabling the supports. Moving over to the Objects tab, we can see that our miniature and supports are already pre-split, and our supports have all of their settings dialed in, ready to slice. Which means that after opening this project, we don't need to do anything at all here in Orca Slicer. We just need to slice our model, check our support connections, and double check the model before sending this straight over to the printer. This new exporting feature creates a much smoother transition from Blender to Orca Slicer, and eliminates some of those last few manual steps that were required for every print. So huge props to ClonePhase, who has been the one maintaining and developing these incredible additions to the tool. As always, they have a complete guide and walkthrough over on their website, so if you want a quick reference guide for Resin2FDM, go show their documentation some love. But for now, let's jump back into Blender and take a look at one other major addition to Resin2FDM in the advanced version of the tool, which, if you are interested, is available over on the Painted for Combat Patreon for as little as $2. Resin2FDM Advanced looks very much the same as our previous versions. Of course, it brings over all of that new functionality from the Lite version of the tool with our 3MF export options, as well as another complete back-end overhaul on things like tip detection to improve those features, but we do also have one major upgrade to this tool for helping to strengthen our supports. So I've gone ahead and brought the same model back into Blender, and if we go ahead and open our feature toggles now, we can see a brand new feature, Support Reinforcement. We'll click this to enable it, and we'll see that here in a moment. So let's go ahead, split by loose parts, and now we can see that there is a new drop-down menu for Support Reinforcement. Now, admittedly, this particular model I've chosen is quite well supported and probably wouldn't need reinforcement, but just for the sake of example, I'll go ahead and remove a few things here so that we can show off what this tool can do. Let's say that you get a miniature file that looks like this, where there are a couple of tall lone supports that might very well work for resin printing, but on an FDM print could very easily become points of failure. Well, with this new feature in the tool, we can go ahead and select our problematic support tower, and then select a secondary tower to brace it to. Then we can choose how many braces we want up the height of these supports. For something this tall, I'd probably go for somewhere around 3, so I'll just go ahead and update that, and then we can click Add Cross Braces, and this will add some additional support structure up that length. And of course, there's some additional features here, such as the diameter factor. In other words, how thick do you want this to be compared to the towers it's connecting to? As we can see here, the previous ones that we generated are 80% of the thickness. Here, we can go ahead, update this to 1, and adding cross braces, it will be the same thicknesses as the support towers. And of course, I can continue to do this around the whole model everywhere that I feel it needs it. For example, somewhere like over here, we could select this support, select something to brace it to. For this, I'll just put one brace across these, and that'll add an additional bit of support between these two. But that is not the only point of reinforcement that we have. As you can see, this is the cross brace section, but we can move over to wrap supports. And this is useful when you have a bunch of support tips branching off of towers, where they could either potentially use a little bit of strength, or we can turn those all into a single mesh to save on the printer having to do a bunch of little circles. But what does that actually mean? Here we can see that there are 4 or 5 support tips that are all very bunched up, branching off of this single tower. Well, by going through and selecting all of the branches that make up these supports, we can go ahead and reinforce the selection. This will turn this collection of what would be 3 cylinders that the print head would have to move around and print into a single piece of mesh that will make it much easier to print, as well as being much sturdier while printing. And this is something we can do again across the whole model, selecting any clusters of branches that branch off from a main tower and reinforcing those areas. This is a feature that will be more helpful on some models than others, and here I'm really just showing an example. So let's go ahead and take a look at another model and see how this could be applicable here. This is the head for the Death Tyrant that I printed in last week's video, and while that was a successful print, it's definitely one that benefited from some extra reinforcement. Things like this lone support tower here are definitely things I would prefer to have braced against another tower. So by selecting it, selecting another one, and adding some braces, that immediately increases my confidence that this tower is actually going to make it to the top to connect to our model. And this print is an excellent example of where we can use the support wrapping as well. As we can see, there are a ton of small supports down the bottom here that are branching off from a single tower. So by selecting all of this and wrapping those supports, we can turn that into a much more sturdy mesh. And once you're happy with the stability of these supports, adding all of the cross braces and wrapping all of the supports you feel need it, you can go ahead and assign your miniature and continue through the tool as usual. And now that we have both of these models in Orca Slicer, we can take a look and compare. Those areas that we wrapped together, we can see that the print head is no longer having to do 5 or 6 individual loops for each of these supports, and instead are just creating one chunk of plastic. And again, areas like these thin branches that are eventually going to turn into our support tips can all be bunched together like this to create a much stronger mesh off the side of one of our main towers. And now that we have both versions of this model processed and prepared, let's go ahead and send them over to the printer and see just what we're working with. Of course, this edition is on top of all of the other incredible features in Resin2FDM Advanced, so if you are interested in picking that up, consider checking out the Painted for Combat Patreon with those links below, where for as little as $2 you can jump into an awesome community Discord of other people using Resin2FDM and printing FDM miniatures, pick up all of my printer profiles and download Resin2FDM Advanced, or at the higher STL tiers, get access to an STL welcome bundle of printable goodies, as well as our monthly packs of STL bases, like our release for April, the Shattered Shale. A set of generic ruined bases where shale tile has been flung into dirty earth. Perfect whether you're painting up some townsfolk fleeing a ruined village, or marines sitting down in a destroyed city. And as with all of my bases, the Shattered Shale have been sculpted to print support-free on FDM printers. So whether you want to pick up Resin2FDM Advanced, join a like-minded community, download some awesome STLs, or just help support the channel, consider checking out the Patreon with the links below. But these improvements to the workflow and new options for strengthening our supports are not the only things that ClonePhase has cooked up. They've also been hard at work creating a batch processing tool to help automate this process for large collections of miniatures. And I understand that this tool is maybe a little more complex than what the average user is expecting from Resin2FDM, so rather than covering it in full detail here today, I'll simply link again to ClonePhase's website where they will have a complete documentation on how to use that for both Resin2FDM Advanced and Resin2FDM Lite. Of course, this extra tool will be available to download anywhere you would normally download Resin2FDM, both in the Gumroad and on the drive. Just look for the Batch Exporter tab and take a look at those docs if you want to check this out. It's been pretty incredible looking around and seeing all of the minis being printed with Resin2FDM, not just in the Painted for Combat Discord where we see it all the time, but also in other corners of the internet. I feel like I'm seeing it pop up more and more on Reddit every day, and it's just awesome to see that so many people are able to get more out of their FDM printing hobby using this tool. Because at the end of the day, I just want people to be able to print cool minis for their hobbies and tabletop games. And the fact that this tool is helping so many people do that is all that I could ask for. I truly hope that everyone enjoys these updates as much as I have. And again, huge thanks to ClonePhase for all of the hard work and the continued development of Resin2FDM. And to everyone out there, keep hobbying, keep printing, and keep playing the games that we love to play. Do be sure to like if you liked, subscribe down below for future FDM printing and tabletop projects, but most importantly, thank you so much for watching. And as always, have a good one.